What's going on everybody, Kalipus Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, we're going to be doing a quick comparison between the Cricket Icon 4 and the Cricket Icon 3. It's really that time of year again, so we're going to take a look at these two phones and go over whether or not the Cricket Icon 4 is really anything new, or if it's just a carbon copy of the Cricket Icon 3. Now before we go any further, as always, I do want to remind you to hit that subscribe button, and if you want to learn more about either phone individually, I will be linking to several other videos about them in the description, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But with that being said, let's get into it. So with the Cricket Icon 4, we're getting a 6.5-inch IPS LCD display with a resolution of 720p, a PPI of 269, and an aspect ratio of 20:9. With the Cricket Icon 3, we're getting a 6.5-inch LCD display with a resolution of 720p, a PPI of 268, and an aspect ratio of 20:9 as well. So as you can see here, the displays are pretty much exactly the same. There's really not a whole lot of a difference here, except I feel like the bezels on the Icon 4 are a tiny bit thinner. In fact, that's definitely the case, especially with the top. But other than that, they are pretty much the same. That being said though, I don't know if it's actually just the wallpaper, but the colors on the Cricket Icon 4 do look a tiny bit better, so maybe it's a marginal improvement. Now for storage, unfortunately there's no change here. Both phones are getting 32GB of internal storage with microSD card expansion, and in my opinion, in this day and age, this is really just not enough. Maybe 10 years ago, 32GB would have been at least acceptable, but now with things like apps, the system, and just files in general getting larger and larger, I feel like if you're doing any decent amount of things on your phone, you're gonna need at least 64. But that being said, these are really entry-level phones, and they're not really meant for heavy use anyway. So since almost every single phone in this price range has essentially the same amount of storage, I guess it's not really that bad. But still keep in mind, if you are doing a little bit more on your phone, at least get a microSD card. But honestly, if you have a bunch of apps and games and stuff like that, you're probably going to want to spend a little bit more and get something that has more storage. Now for security features, both phones have fingerprint scanners right here on the back, but the Cricket Icon 4 actually does have Face Unlock too, whereas with the Cricket Icon 3, we're not getting Face Unlock, only the fingerprint scanner. Now I'm not sure how many people actually use Face Unlock, but it's nice that with the Cricket Icon 4, you're at least getting the option to use it if you want. But starting with the Icon 4, let's try out the fingerprint scanners. There we go, one more time. And there we go. And now for the Icon 3. There we go, one more time. And there we go. So as you can see, they worked decently well. Maybe not the fastest, but they do get the job done. And again, remember, with the Cricket Icon 4, we are getting Face Unlock, so if you want to use that instead, you always can. But again, the Cricket Icon 3 does not have Face Unlock, only the fingerprint scanner. Now for the camera setups here, there's really not a whole lot to see. Both phones have water drop notches for the front-facing cameras. Both cameras are 5 megapixels. Then on the back, both phones have single cameras here. With the Cricket Icon 4, this camera is 13 megapixels. And with the Cricket Icon 3, this camera is 8 megapixels. So in general, as far as features go, if you're taking a lot of photos, these are not going to be the phones for you, because there's pretty much nothing here. That being said though, I do think the Cricket Icon 4 is at least a little bit better, so maybe if you're using Snapchat more often or something, the Cricket Icon 4 will be a better choice, but in general, there's not really a significant difference, and if you really want a phone with a good camera, you're probably going to have to get something else. When it comes to RAM and processor, with the Cricket Icon 4, we're getting 3GB of RAM with the MediaTek Helio A22 processor, and with the Cricket Icon 3, we're getting 3GB of RAM as well with the MediaTek Helio A20. Now despite these phones having slightly different processors, the performance is essentially going to be exactly the same. You're really not going to see a significant difference here, and keep in mind, these are not very fast phones, so if you're going to be on your phone a little bit more, even doing more basic activities like web browsing and social media, these phones will feel a little slow. But that being said, if you're really just using your phone for the bare minimum and not really a whole lot else, they will at least get the job done. I did run Geekbench 5 benchmark tests on both phones, and here are the scores I got. So as you can see here, the Cricket Icon 4 is a tiny bit faster, but really not by much. So again, you're not really going to see a significant performance difference between the two, and in general, unless again, you're really not using your phone a whole lot, both devices are going to feel pretty slow. Now for the batteries, the Cricket Icon 4 has a 4000 mAh battery, and the Cricket Icon 3 has a 3500 mAh battery. So with the Cricket Icon 4, we're getting a bit of an upgrade here. Not really that much of an improvement, but it is still some. And in general, if you do want a phone with pretty good battery life, but you don't need the absolute best, the Cricket Icon 4 will be a pretty decent choice. In addition to this, I don't know about the Cricket Icon 3, but the Cricket Icon 4 does support 10W fast charging, and in my experience, the charging speeds with the Icon 4 are noticeably better than the Cricket Icon 3. So in general, if the battery is important to you, then you're probably going to be okay with the Cricket Icon 4. When it comes to software, the Cricket Icon 4 does have Android 12, and the Cricket Icon 3 has Android 11. Now this is not really surprising, since the Cricket Icon 4 is obviously the newer version of the Icon 3, and just keep in mind, these phones are not going to get any major updates, so if you want, say, Android 13, or any long-term software support for that matter, these are not going to be the phones for you. But that being said, if you want something at least a little bit newer, then the Cricket Icon 4, with again Android 12, should be at least okay. Another really cool thing about the Cricket Icon 4 that I'm definitely genuinely glad to see is that this phone actually does have NFC, making it the cheapest phone I've ever seen that has this feature. So if you like to make contactless mobile payments using Tap and Pay, keep in mind you will be able to do this with the Cricket Icon 4, but not the Cricket Icon 3 because this phone does not have NFC. Definitely a great thing to see here, and I am hoping more and more entry-level phones start to get this feature too. But in conclusion, is the Cricket Icon 4 really an improvement from the Cricket Icon 3? In general, although almost all the improvements are really subtle, I would say overall, the Cricket Icon 4 is still clearly better. Sure, a lot of things stayed the same, like the displays for example, pretty much the exact same. The designs, while the Cricket Icon 4 in my opinion looks a little bit better, there's really not that much of a difference. The cameras unfortunately don't have any new features, but the battery is slightly larger, the software is newer, and best of all, the Cricket Icon 4 does have NFC, which is a feature I never thought I'd see in a phone in this price range. So overall, if you're looking for a phone for really basic activities like web browsing, social media, maybe watching a couple videos every now and then, you don't need a bunch of storage, a really nice camera, or even a fancy display or anything like that. I feel like in that kind of situation, the Cricket Icon 4, especially for the money, is actually a pretty good choice, and while not a whole lot has changed, I do still think this phone is a decent improvement from the Cricket Icon 3. But this concludes my comparison between the Cricket Icon 4 and the Cricket Icon 3. Again, if you want to learn more about either of these phones, I will be linking to several other videos about each of them in the description, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow Cleepus Tech on Twitter and Instagram. And as always, I will see you in the next video.